After 3 weeks of living in silence, my hearing suddenly returned. But before I could tell anyone, I heard what my daughter-in-law was saying about me and my son. That old woman doesn't know anything, and he didn't even last 2 minutes. I pretended not to have heard anything. I kept smiling. I let her think I was a harmless, deaf old woman, but on her birthday, all I needed was one recording to make everything fall apart. But before we continue, check to see if you've subscribed to the channel and share in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to know how far our revenge stories go. I woke up earlier than usual, when the light of dawn hadn't yet filtered through the cracks in the bedroom curtain. There was something different, a vague but clear feeling that made my heart beat a little faster. I lay still, listening. Then I heard a soft, crystalline sound, like a drop of dew falling on a lake. The song of a lark sounded cheerfully in the branches of the bugville outside the window. That song, small but sharp, seemed to call my name, pulling me out of the silent darkness. I sat up suddenly, so fast that the bed creaked. My trembling hand went to my ear in disbelief at what I had just discovered. I heard the rustle of the sheets under my palm, the rhythm of my breathing, steady but slightly agitated. My hearing had returned. I left the room, my bare feet touching the cold wooden floor. Each step carried a wonderful sound. The wood creaked softly under my weight. The curtains moved as I passed by them. I went downstairs to the living room. Valeria, my daughter-in-law, was there with a steaming teapot of chamomile in her hands. The steam rose thickly, filling the room with a warm, sweet aroma. She did not see me enter. Valeria smiled. She waved her hand, her long fingers moving gently, asking if I would like a cup of tea. I nodded, pulled my favorite armchair closer to the table, and sat down. The chair made a small noise, and I found myself smiling when I heard that sound again. I decided not to tell Valeria that I had recovered my hearing just yet. I wanted to keep this secret for just a moment to enjoy the magic of this new sensation. Valeria placed a cup of tea in front of me. The warmth brushed against my hand and a slight shiver ran through my body. Then she took out her phone, her fingers moving quickly across the screen. A video call connected. On the other end was Sophia, Valeria's best friend, whom I had only seen a couple of times at family gatherings. Valeria's voice sounded sweet as always, asking about work, about the children. Then Valeria glanced at me from the corner of her eye, as if checking something, thinking that I still couldn't hear. She lowered her voice and began to whisper. But to me, every word was now as clear as a church bell. That old woman doesn't understand anything, she said with annoyance. Having to take care of her every day is exhausting. I felt a knot in my chest, but I remained motionless, my hands clutching the cup. Valeria continued, her tone laced with contempt. Besides, Diego is so stingy it's disgusting. If it weren't for this house and his mother's money, I would have left a long time ago, and to top it off, it didn't even last 2 minutes. The cup trembled slightly in my fingers, hitting the saucer and making a small clink. Valeria turned around, startled, her eyes wide, but I raised my head and pretended to take another sip of tea, my face serene. My heart was pounding, as if it were going to jump out of my chest. Her words echoed in my mind, sharp as shards of broken glass. Valeria, the daughter-in-law I had loved like a daughter, thought that of me. And Diego, my son, whom I had loved and protected my entire life, was despised by her simply for being thrifty. Valeria quickly told Sophia, well, I have to go and prepare breakfast for my dear mother-in-law. We'll talk later, quote. She hung up the phone and her smile returned, as if those venomous words had never left her mouth. She turned to me and gestured to see if I wanted something to eat. I shook my head, faked a couple of coughs, and pointed toward the bedroom, meaning that I was feeling a little tired and wanted to rest. She nodded. Her expression immediately turned concerned. She even reached over and gently took my arm to help me up as if I were a frail old lady in need of care. I let her guide me toward the stairs. Each step was an effort to remain calm. Upon reaching the room, I slammed the door shut and locked it. The sound of the lock clicking startled me as if I were waking from a nightmare. I slumped on the edge of the bed, my hands shaking. I picked up the phone, but my fingers were shaking so much that I almost dropped it. I looked up Diego's number in the phone book, my fingers sliding across the screen. When I pressed the call button, the on-hold music began to play. Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, the piece that my late husband, Tomás, loved the most. That sound was like a hammer blow to my memory, taking me back to those happy days with him when we would dance to that tune in the living room. And Diego, just a little boy, would run around laughing. I am Mrs. Mercedes Alvarez. I am 68 years old and I live alone in a house in Querétaro. This house is my entire world. It holds every trace of Tomás and the years I spent raising Diego alone. Tomás left me too soon, the victim of a cruel cancer, leaving me this house, some land in the outskirts, and the savings that he had worked so hard to accumulate during his life. I never considered it a fortune, but rather an inheritance from the soul, a reminder of my husband's love and sacrifice. Raising Diego alone was not easy. There were nights when I stayed awake, sitting by his bedside as he had a fever, holding his hand and praying that he would get better. There were days when, in the hot sun of the garden, I patiently helped him learn to ride a bike. He fell over and over again, his knees scraped, but he kept laughing, his eyes shining with joy. "Mom, I did it!" he cried the first time he pedaled without falling. I hugged him tightly, tears streaming down my cheeks from pure happiness. Diego was all I had. The only light in my years of solitude after Tomás left. The day Diego brought Valeria home to introduce her to me, I felt a new glimmer of hope. She entered holding a potted orchid in bloom. Her smile was as radiant as the spring sun. "Madam, your house is beautiful. It looks like something out of a painting," she said, her eyes shining as she looked around the living room. Valeria stopped in front of Tomás's old photos and asked me about each one. "This is his wedding photo, right? His husband looks so elegant." She spoke with a genuine curiosity that made me smile. I thought what a wonderful woman she was and that Diego had been lucky to find someone like her. Sweet, thoughtful, and very affectionate with his family. After getting married, Diego and Valeria moved into a comfortable apartment in the neighborhood next door. I didn't feel sad because I knew Diego needed space to build his own life. Valeria continued to visit me frequently. Every weekend she would bring something to share. Sometimes a pot of hot chicken soup, other times a tray of cakes that she had made herself. "Mom, try it, I made it with my grandmother's recipe," she would say proudly. As I ate, my heart felt warm, as if home had come alive again. Once she even sat with me for hours to teach me how to use a smartphone. "Mom, now you can video call Diego when you miss him," she said smiling, showing me step by step on the screen. Thanks to her, I could see Diego on my phone screen every time I traveled for work. Valeria had worked as an office worker, but one day she confessed to me that the job was suffocating her. "I want to do something of my own, Mom, something more creative," she said, her eyes shining as she told me about her dream of opening a clothing store. I saw in her that spark of passion that I had seen in Diego when he started his first job. Valeria transformed a room in the apartment into a small studio. She hung clothes everywhere, installed bright lights, and every night she would do live broadcasts to sell. I used to watch her broadcasts, admiring the confidence with which she spoke, the way she presented each dress with such enthusiasm, but once I overheard her unintentionally complaining to Diego on the phone. Her voice sounded tired and frustrated. "Honey, this laptop is really old. It processes orders very slowly. I'm exhausted." I felt tenderness when I heard her. Valeria was doing everything she could to build her career, but she didn't have the means. Diego only responded with a soft laugh and his voice calm. Relax, honey, let me save a little more and I'll buy you a new one. I knew that Diego was always careful with money, partly because he grew up with so many needs and also because he wanted to keep what Tomas and I had left. But when I heard to Valeria, an idea began to form in my mind. I wanted to give her a special gift for her next birthday, a sum of money so that she could start her own business. I imagined the joy on her face. Having her own fashion store with shelves full of clothes and customers coming and going, I wanted her to succeed, not only because she was my daughter-in-law, but because I truly believed that she deserved it. I even called our trusted lawyer, Mr. Juan, to ask him about the legal process for a transfer. Mrs. Mercedes, this is simple, he said over the phone in his serious voice. You just have to draw up a donation contract. I'll take care of the paperwork, but rest assured. It's a considerable amount. I smiled firmly. I'm sure, Juan. Valeria is my daughter-in-law. I want her to have a good future. And then came that weekend afternoon that changed my life. I was riding the last bus of the day, clutching a cloth bag full of fresh poblano peppers and a bar of dark chocolate. I smiled as I thought about the mole that Diego loved so much. That day I wanted to make it just to see her smile when I got home. But as I thought about adding some cinnamon to the mole, a high-pitched scream suddenly tore through the air. The tires of the bus screeched as if screaming in pain. The car swerved sharply to one side. I still couldn't quite make sense of what was happening when I heard the sound of metal clashing, sharp and terrifying, mixed with the crash of glass breaking. My head slammed hard against the window. A searing pain erupted like fire. I tried to hold on to my seat, but everything in front of me blurred and then went completely black. The noise of the world disappeared, leaving only a black, icy void. When I woke up, the smell of disinfectant hit my nose and I frowned. I was lying in a completely white bed. The neon light from the ceiling was burning my eyes. I tried to move, but my body felt heavy, as if an invisible stone was crushing me. Then I saw Diego sitting right next to me, his hand tightly squeezing mine. His eyes were red as if he had cried. Valeria was behind him with her hand gently resting on his shoulder, her face worried but tender. Diego's lips moved. I saw him say, "Mom, you woke up." But no sound reached my ears. I panicked, I put my hands to my ears, but nothing changed. That silence was more terrifying than any pain. A doctor came in. He was wearing a white coat, a kind smile, but a serious look. He said something. I saw his lips move, but no sound reached me. I looked at Diego, then at Valeria, looking for help with my eyes. Valeria quickly grabbed a notepad and pen from the table and handed them to the doctor. He wrote a few clear lines in a firm handwriting, as if to reassure me. The surgery was a success. He suffered a severe concussion. He will temporarily be unable to hear, but don't worry, his hearing will return in a few weeks. As I finished reading, I felt my heart sink. Losing my hearing, even temporarily, was something I had never imagined. I nodded to the doctor, trying to force a smile so that Diego wouldn't worry, but inside me there was a storm of uncertainty. During the following days in the hospital, Valeria took care of me with touching dedication. She brought me a bowl of hot chicken soup, the aroma of which reminded me of warm afternoons in the kitchen. I cooked it for 4 hours, Mom, she wrote in a small notebook. She sat by the bed, feeding me each spoonful carefully, blowing on it first to cool it down. Once she even washed my hair in bed. Her hands gently massaged my scalp, and then she braided it neatly into a braid. Quote, "Mom always has to look pretty," she wrote, accompanying the message with a drawing of a smiley face. I looked at her and felt immense gratitude. Every time a nurse came in to check something, Valeria was the one who came out to talk to her. She wrote down all the doctor's instructions in the notebook, from the doses of the medications to the schedules, and then she patiently showed it to me. Quote, "Don't worry, Mom, I'll take care of everything," she wrote with a look full of tenderness. I felt lucky. Although the accident had robbed me of my hearing, I still had Diego and Valeria by my side. When I was discharged, I returned to the family home in Querétaro, but everything was different. Now there were no more birdsong, nor the sound of the wind through the trees. Valeria posted notes all over the house. Be careful with the steps on the stairs. Take your medicine at 8 a.m. at the kitchen table. Close the window when it rains in the living room. She also bought a small whiteboard and placed it in the middle of the living room so we could talk. Write here what you want to eat, Mom, she wrote with a wink. I smiled and nodded, but inside me there was a great emptiness. I missed our lively conversations. Her loud laugh when she talked about difficult clients on her live broadcasts. Valeria also took photos of the two of us. In one, she was feeding me with a spoon, in another, I was sitting in the garden reading, and the sunlight filtering through the leaves made my hair shine. She uploaded those photos to social media, accompanied by messages full of affection. Happiness is being able to take care of my second mother. I hope she recovers soon. I read the comments from friends and family. They all said that Diego was lucky to have married such a good woman as Valeria. You are a gem, my dear, wrote an old friend of mine. Diego is so lucky, commented a distant relative. I looked at those words and felt warm in my heart. I wrote on the whiteboard. Thank you, Valeria. Having you is a blessing. She read it and ran to hug me. I felt her shoulders tremble and I knew they were tears of happiness. 3 weeks after the accident, I woke up early one morning. A soft buzzing sound echoed in my ear, like a tiny lost bee looking for a way out. I remained motionless, afraid the sound would disappear. I listened with my heart beating hard. The buzzing became louder and suddenly I realized it was the engine of a truck passing by on the street in front of the house. I sat up slowly and carefully, as if I was afraid of disrupting the miracle that had just happened. Then I understood. My hearing was back. I went into the living room, eager to give Valeria a big surprise, but I didn't imagine that I would be the one who would be surprised. Her words were like sharp knives piercing straight into my heart. That old woman doesn't know anything. I have to take care of her every day. It's exhausting, and besides, Diego is so stingy it's disgusting. If it weren't for this house and that old lady's money, I would have left long ago. Hello, Mom. Diego's voice on the other end of the line pulled me out of my thoughts. What would happen if I spoke now? Diego would make a scene. He would confront Valeria. She would deny everything. She would cry. She would say that after the accident I was no longer right in the head. I had no proof, nothing more than what I had heard. Valeria would find a way to make me look like a liar and Diego, blinded by love, would probably believe her. I would lose my only advantage, the secret. I couldn't allow that. I hung up immediately, without letting Diego say another word. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. I opened the messages and typed a short sentence to Diego. I accidentally dialed, "It's okay, son." I pressed send, feeling like I had just crossed a line. I sat down at the desk and turned on the laptop. The screen lit up with the familiar bank interface. I reached for the automatic transfer I had created for Valeria's entrepreneurship fund. That gift I had prepared with such enthusiasm to help her fulfill her dream. My fingers stopped on the cancel button. I didn't hesitate. I pressed it firmly. A message appeared. Transfer canceled. A cold but firm feeling ran through my body. I no longer felt pain, only determination. The game had changed and now I had the rules. In the days after I recovered my hearing, I lived like a seasoned actress on the stage of my own life. I continued to play the role of the unfortunate, hearing-impaired mother-in-law, relying on the notes Valeria wrote for me. Every morning I would feign clumsiness, my eyes bleary-eyed, or sit silently by the window, as if the world were still a new place to me. But inside I observed, listened, and remembered every detail. One morning I sat in the garden where Tomas's roses were still blooming. I held an old book in my hands, my eyes half closed as if I were falling asleep, but through the small crack I watched Valeria's every move. She came out with the watering can in her hand, her face cheerful as usual, but when she thought no one was looking, that sweetness disappeared. She watered the plants roughly, splashing water everywhere, as if venting her anger. She glanced over at me, checking to see if I was watching her, and murmured in annoyance, "When will this end? If it weren't for that old lady's inheritance, I wouldn't have to put on this farce." Those words were like another stab in the heart. The inheritance, why was she suddenly talking about my assets? I lay still, pretending to still be asleep, but in my mind everything was starting to take shape. That night I was sitting in the reading room when I smelled the golden smell of garlic coming from the kitchen. Valeria was preparing dinner and the house was filled with the aroma of pozole that she knew I loved. I decided to go get a glass of water, wanting to see if she could let out anything else. The kitchen door was ajar, and I stopped in the doorway when I heard his loud voice on the phone. It was a sweet, honeyed voice, completely different from the bitter tone of the morning. "Honey, I need to talk to you," he began by saying in a tender, almost flirtatious tone. "Mom is so weak now and all the paperwork will be a mess later. Why don't you ask her to sign to transfer me a share of the house right now? It could be like a gift from her to us." Quote. I held my breath and put my ear to the door. My heart was beating hard, about to jump out of my chest. I heard Diego's voice on the other end, low and hesitant. "We'd better leave that for later. Mom is sick, I don't want to bother her." I could imagine Diego's tired face, his serious eyes every time he had to face an argument, but Valeria didn't stop. Her voice became high-pitched, irritated. "When will it be later? I'm going to keep taking care of her day and night so I don't get anything. Do you only think about your work or do you just not want her to give me anything?" Diego's voice sounded even more exhausted. "It's not that. It's fine. I'll come back at the weekend and we'll talk to Mom directly." But Valeria didn't do it. "You always say the same thing. You only know how to avoid everything," she screamed, almost beside herself. There was a brief silence, and then I heard the phone beep. Diego had probably hung up to avoid a bigger fight. Valeria threw the phone on the counter. The loud thud resonated in the silent kitchen. She exhaled angrily and muttered, "Useless." I quickly stepped away and walked toward the living room, my heart still pounding. I took a deep breath and calmly entered the kitchen, pretending I had just arrived. I pointed to the pitcher of water and said I wanted to pour myself a glass. Valeria turned and her expression changed completely. A kind smile appeared immediately as if nothing had happened. She filled a glass of water and wrote on the whiteboard, "Mom, get some rest. Dinner is almost ready." I took the glass with a shaking hand. I nodded, smiled at her, but inside my heart sank. Now I understood. Valeria didn't just want money, she wanted this house. Her ambition was deeper than I imagined. At noon the next day, I sat in my usual armchair with a cup of cold tea in my hand, pretending to be tired. I turned to Valeria and signaled to her that my head hurt a little and that I wanted to go to bed early. She nodded with her usual gentle smile and wrote on the whiteboard, "Mom, rest, I'll prepare a light lunch for you later." I smiled back and returned to my room, closing the door, but I didn't lie down. I sat on the edge of the bed with my hands clasped together, trying to stay calm. Half an hour later, I heard the sound of the vacuum cleaner resonating from the living room. That constant, high-pitched sound was like a curtain covering everything. Then I heard Valeria's voice hidden among the noise, talking on the phone. I thought the sound of the vacuum cleaner was the perfect disguise, that no one would be able to hear her. But I heard every word, every syllable sharp as a blade. I tiptoed out of the room barefoot so as not to make any noise. I hid behind the wall in the hallway where the light from the living room didn't reach. Valeria spoke to Sophia in a tone full of contempt. My husband is useless. I asked him for such a simple thing and he doesn't even dare to do that. Come on, I'll have to manage on my own. I heard the sound of papers being shuffled as if she were leafing through a sheaf of documents. Then her voice sounded triumphant and cold. I've already printed out a complete power of attorney. I'll tell him it's a medical file that he has to sign in order to bring a specialist from the city. I felt my heart tighten as if an invisible hand were squeezing it. But Valeria didn't stop. She kept talking with cruel satisfaction. As long as he signs that, everything will be mine. This house, the land on the outskirts, and all the money in the savings account. I've done my research, Sophia. He has more than I thought. Sophia said something on the other end. I couldn't make out, but Valeria's laugh was clear, sharp, and full of arrogance. Of course, as soon as I have everything, the first thing I'll do is file for divorce. I'm fed up with this husband who always lives away and hardly ever looks me in the eye. My whole body went cold as if someone had thrown a bucket of ice water on me. I had to lean against the wall to keep my balance. My head was spinning. Valeria didn't just want the money, she wanted to steal everything, destroy Diego, and leave as if nothing had happened. This house, the one that Tomas and I built brick by brick, where Diego grew up laughing, was nothing more than a possession to her. And Diego, my son, who loved her with all his heart, was a burden to her, something she could throw away without remorse. I silently returned to my room and carefully closed the door. I sank onto the edge of the bed with trembling hands. The pain in my chest transformed into a flame of determination, burning hot and unquenchable. I thought of Tomas, who dedicated his life to building a home for us, who taught me that family is the most valuable thing. I thought of Diego, his clear, childlike eyes and his tired voice last night, when Valeria was pressuring him. I wouldn't let her destroy my son. I wouldn't let Tomas' legacy fall into the hands of a liar. I picked up the phone, ran my finger through my contact list, and didn't call Diego. I knew I couldn't talk to him yet, that I didn't have enough evidence for him to believe me. Instead, I searched for a name I hadn't dialed in a while. Lucia, my closest neighbor. Lucia was a widow like me, but with a sharp intelligence and a heart you could trust. We had spent hours sitting on the porch drinking tea and telling each other stories about life. She would be my ally. I sent her a short message. Lucia, are you home? I need your help with something very important. I pressed send. My heart was pounding. Just a few minutes later, my phone vibrated. Lucia's message appeared on the screen. I'm home. Meet me at the back door in 10 minutes. I took a deep breath, feeling as if I was about to enter a battle. I knew I couldn't face Valeria alone. Not when she had planned everything with such precision, but with Lucia's help I would have a chance. Valeria was in the living room getting ready for her midday live broadcast. I could hear her laughter and cheerful voice through my headphones, completely immersed in her virtual world, oblivious to anything around her. This was my chance. I stood up carefully. I walked to the back door, my bare feet barely touching the wooden floor so as not to make a sound. The door closed behind me and I slipped into Lucia's house, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it was trying to escape my chest. Lucia opened the door at my gentle knock. She pulled me inside. Her eyes reflected concern, but also determination. Mercedes, what's wrong? She asked in a deep but firm voice. I couldn't speak right away. I felt a lump in my throat. I took out my phone and began to quickly write down the whole story in the notes. How I had recovered my hearing, Valeria's cruel words, and the plan to take my possessions that I had spoken to Sophia about. My fingers trembled as I wrote, but I tried to make everything clear, every detail as sharp as the wounds Valeria had left in my heart. When Lucia finished reading, her eyes widened, going from surprise to anger. She put her hand on my shoulder and patted me firmly as if she wanted to convey strength to me. "Don't worry, Mercedes," she said in a clear and determined voice. "Now I can hear every sound clearly. My nephew works with electronic devices. I'm going to call him." She went to a wooden table in the living room, opened a small box, and took out some small devices. "This is a recorder. It looks like a phone charger," she explained, holding up a small black object. "And this other one is disguised as an air freshener. All you have to do is plug it in and it records everything." I looked at those tiny devices and felt a spark of hope reborn. They were my weapon, the way to unmask Valeria without confronting her directly. Lucia and I sat down to plan carefully. I would go back first. I would continue pretending to be the deaf and fragile mother-in-law. A little while later, Lucia would come with the excuse of bringing me some chicken broth to strengthen me. While Valeria was distracted, she would place the devices in strategic places around the house. "We have to do it quickly, Mercedes," Lucia said with a sharp look. "That girl is more cunning than she thinks." I nodded, feeling like I was preparing for a battle I couldn't lose. Everything went according to plan. I returned home and sat on the couch, pretending to be tired. Valeria was still on her broadcast. Her high-pitched voice could be heard through the headphones as she showed off a silk dress to her customers. When Lucia knocked on the door carrying a pot of steaming soup, Valeria quickly turned off the broadcast and ran to answer it with a radiant smile. "Aunt Lucia, you're just in time. Mom needs to get better," she said in a voice as sweet as honey. From the living room, I wrote on my whiteboard. "Thank you, Lucia. Your soup is always delicious." Valeria let out a loud laugh, showing off to Lucia how well she was taking care of me, as if she wanted to earn even more praise. As Valeria and I chatted through the board, Lucia acted quickly. She plugged a charger into a hidden socket behind the sofa, right where Valeria used to sit and talk on the phone. A wax scent was placed on the shelf in the hallway, near the kitchen door, where she used to do live broadcasts or calls. Another device was hidden in the kitchen behind the spice jars that Valeria almost never touched. Lucia did everything with the dexterity of someone with experience. Her gaze met mine and she nodded discreetly as if to say, "Done." That afternoon, Valeria entered the living room with a smile radiant as the sun. She carried a thick folder and placed it on the table in front of me with an excited expression. She wrote on the board in elegant handwriting. "Good news, Mom. I contacted a very good doctor in the city. He agreed to come to my house to check you. This is the registration form. You just have to sign the confirmation." I took the folder with my heart beating fast. I turned the pages pretending to read carefully, but my eyes soon found the words "full power of attorney agreement" printed in bold on the last page. The detailed clauses about the transfer of ownership of the house, the land outside, and also my bank accounts were clearly displayed. Valeria hadn't lied about her preparations, she had everything figured out. I pretended to frown, pointing at the complicated legal phrases, implying that I didn't understand. Valeria wrote impatiently on the board. "It's just a formality, Mom. Sign quickly so I can send it on time." Judging from the movement of her lips, her voice was still sweet, but I could see the rush in her eyes. She wanted me to sign now, for everything to be over before I suspected anything. I tried to buy time by turning the pages over and over, my heart in turmoil but keeping my cool. I knew that if I signed, I would lose everything, not only the possessions, but also the memories of Tomas, the home that he and I had built. Just as Valeria was pointing out where I should sign, the doorbell rang sharply and unexpectedly. She frowned, visibly annoyed by the interruption. She motioned to me. "Mom, wait a moment," and she ran off to receive a package from the courier. Left alone in the room, I acted immediately. I took out my phone and activated the silent camera mode. My hands were shaking, but I carefully turned each page of the document and took photos of everything, especially the last page with the words "full power of attorney agreement" and the empty space for my signature. With each click, my heart beat faster, as if I were stealing a dangerous secret. I had barely finished photographing the last page when I heard Valeria's footsteps approaching from the door. I quickly locked the phone, put it in my robe pocket, and put the folder back in its proper place. Valeria entered the room with a small, carefully wrapped box, probably the package that had just been delivered. She placed it on the table with a soft click and looked back at the folder that was still in front of me. Her smile was still radiant, but there was a contained tension in her eyes. "Mom, sign so I can send the document sooner," she wrote on the board, her strokes quicker than usual. I cleared my throat and said calmly, "Why the rush? If I sign later, will it cause you any problems?" The question came out simple but sharp, like an arrow aimed straight at Valeria. She froze, her eyes wide open. Panic flickered across her face briefly before it was replaced by a forced, crooked smile. Valeria wrote quickly on the board. "Oh, no, not at all. I guess I worried too much. There's no rush, we can do this later." She hurriedly gathered the folder, hugged it to her chest as if she was afraid I would take it away, and made an excuse to go to the kitchen. I knew her plan had just fallen apart. When Valeria disappeared behind the kitchen door, I fell silent, my hands still clutching the glass of water. My heart was pounding. That night, after Valeria had returned to her apartment, I sat alone in the silent house. The dim light from the lamp illuminated the old photos of Tomas and Diego hanging on the wall. I took out my phone, my fingers swiping across the screen. I didn't call Diego. Instead, I opened my messages and typed, "Son, it's Valeria's birthday this weekend. Can you come? I want to throw her a surprise party to thank her for taking care of me." I pressed send. My heart was pounding, but my mind was clearer than ever. A few minutes later, Diego replied, "Of course, Mom. I'll do my best to come. Don't worry about a thing. Leave it to me." I smiled, a cold smile, but calculated. I replied, "I don't want to prepare it myself. Just make sure you get there on time." I left the phone feeling like I had just set up a net waiting for prey to come in. The next day, while Valeria went shopping, I carefully collected all the recorders that Lucia had placed. I moved gently, checking every corner of the house so I didn't leave any devices behind. The charger behind the sofa, the air freshener on the bookshelf, and another device in the kitchen. They were all well hidden, no one would suspect. I took them to my room, closed the door, and sat down next to the computer with my headphones on. I listened carefully to every fragment of the recordings, to every word Valeria said like stabs in my chest. I eliminated the background noise and only saved the most venomous phrases, the part where she complained to Sofia about me, calling me an old woman who doesn't know anything. The part where she pressured Diego to sign the transfer of assets, and especially the part where she bragged about her plan to keep everything for herself and then divorce Diego. Every word, hers was a wound, but I didn't allow myself to be weak. I stitched everything together into a single audio file, crisp and clear. Then I opened the photos I had taken of the power of attorney file that I had kept secret. I created a simple slideshow, showing each page of the document with its cold legal words. Full power of attorney, transfer of ownership of real estate, and bank accounts. I arranged them carefully so that when I showed them to everyone, they would clearly see Valeria's plan. I reviewed every detail, from the sound to the images. Everything was ready for the birthday party. The morning of Valeria's birthday, I woke up before the sun came up. I went out into the garden with a pair of pruning shears. I carefully cut the most beautiful red roses, those same flowers that I remembered well. Valeria had watered roughly, as if they meant nothing to her. I placed them in an old porcelain vase, set it in the center of the table, and told myself that this would be the day I would get justice for my family. I told Valeria wanted to go into the kitchen to prepare some dishes and thank you. Mom, you're completely recovered now to do that, she wrote on the board, her eyes shining with excitement. She took a photo of me by the stove holding a wooden spoon and posted it on her social media with the phrase, "Mom has recovered and is even preparing her own birthday party. How happy I am." I smiled when I saw her, but deep down I knew that the photo was just part of the play she had put on. Valeria didn't know that I had prepared a much bigger surprise, not to thank her, but to unmask her. She excitedly called her friends, including Sophia, her accomplice. In those poisonous words, "Don't forget to be on time," she said in a cheerful voice on the phone. I listened to her and knew that she didn't just want to surprise Diego, she wanted to show off her perfect life. She wanted everyone to see her as an ideal wife, an exemplary daughter-in-law. In the afternoon, Diego arrived home. I heard the sound of his car pulling up to the gate, and when he got in I noticed that he was thinner, his face tired from a long work trip, but his eyes shone with joy when he saw me. "Mom, you're doing much better," he said, hugging me tightly. In his hands he carried a large bouquet of fragrant lilies and a red velvet box. I smiled and patted him on the shoulder, but my heart was heavy. Diego didn't know that the gift he had prepared for his wife would soon be overshadowed by the painful truth I was about to reveal. The party began as the sun was setting. The house was filled with music, laughter, and conversation. Valeria was the center of attention in her emerald green silk dress, receiving congratulations, smiling like a queen. I sat silently in a corner watching her. When everyone was seated at the table, Diego stood up and opened the velvet box. Inside was a necklace with a sapphire pendant that sparkled under the lights. "Valeria, I chose this one because it suits you," he said in a warm voice. Valeria hugged him and replied sweetly, "Thank you, I love you very much." She gave me a quick glance, a triumphant look, as if she wanted to show me that she still had everything under control. I lowered my head and pretended to take a sip of water, but I knew my moment was coming. After dinner, it was time for the gifts. The guests approached one by one to give Valeria their carefully wrapped presents. A silk scarf, a perfume, a small handbag. She received them with a smile, thanking them nonstop. Finally, all eyes turned to me. Valeria looked at me. Her smile faltered for a moment, as if she were trying to guess what I would do. I stood up slowly, without a gift box in my hands, only the television remote control. I smiled at her with a smile that I knew she had never seen before, cold, sharp, and full of intention. "Valeria," I said in a firm voice, causing the entire room to fall silent. "I don't have a material gift. I have something more special for you, to thank you for everything you've done." Quote. I pointed the remote control at the large television screen in the living room and pressed play. The screen remained dark, but a familiar voice began to sound through the speakers, clear and sharp, cutting through the silence. "If it weren't for that old woman's house and money, I would have left a long time ago." It was Valeria's voice, cold and full of contempt. Then another voice, mocking and cruel, continued. "As soon as I sign, everything will be mine. The house, the land, the bills. Then I'll file for divorce. Seriously, Diego is terrible. He can't even stand 2 minutes." The room fell silent. Valeria's smile froze. Her face turned pale as paper. Diego, stunned, looked at his wife with eyes full of confusion. Sophia lowered her head, gripping the edge of the table with a haggard face. At that moment, the television screen lit up, showing the first image, the cover of a contract with the title Extended Power of Attorney Agreement. The following pages appeared one by one, revealing in detail each clause regarding the transfer of assets, everything perfectly clear. I turned off the sound, took the microphone, and my now firm and unshaking voice resonated. Today, Mom had planned to announce a valuable entrepreneurship fund to give to you, so that you could open your fashion store, like you always dreamed of. I looked Valeria straight in the eyes, saw her shudder, her lips pursed. But instead of giving you money, I'm teaching you a lesson. Greed and lies will never buy happiness or respect. Valeria stood still, her lips trembling, unable to utter a word. The guests began to murmur. The looks of admiration turned to contempt and disappointment. Diego stood up slowly without looking at Valeria. His gaze was fixed on the television screen, and then he turned to me with his eyes full of pain and disappointment. The birthday party ended in a suffocating silence. The guests, they said goodbye one by one with hurried steps and evasive glances. No one said a word to Valeria. Sophia was the first to leave, almost running away. Her heels clicked hurriedly on the wooden floor. I was still standing in a corner, the remote control clutched in my hand, my heart heavy but relieved at the same time. When the house was left with only the three of us, Diego turned to Valeria. She was there, her shoulders slightly hunched, but with a cold look like never before. "Give me the keys to the apartment," he said hoarsely, without a hint of emotion. Valeria burst into tears, tears rolling down her cheeks, but I knew they weren't from regret. She took his hand, her voice trembling. "Honey, let me explain. I didn't mean to, I just did." Diego pushed her hand away with a firm gesture, though full of pain. "There's nothing to explain," he replied in an icy voice. "I've heard and seen it all." Valeria stood still, her lips pressed together, her face pale. She knew it was all over. Trembling, she took the key ring from her purse and left it on the table with a sharp click. She didn't dare look at me, just went upstairs in silence and began to pack her things into a small suitcase. The sound of the zipper breaking the silence was like a full stop. Without a word of farewell, she left into the night, her silhouette disappearing behind the gate. A week later, Diego filed for divorce. The process was quick, since Valeria didn't, he made no claim. Maybe he knew he had no chance. Diego sold the old apartment, that place full of false memories, and moved with me to the family home in Querétaro. The first few days he spoke very little, immersed himself in work, spending hours in front of the computer as if routine could erase the wound. I didn't pressure him or interrogate him, I just cooked his favorite dishes and made him a cup of chamomile tea every night. I knew time would heal, but first Diego needed space to face himself. Little by little Diego began to open up more. He no longer traveled as much for work and spent more time at home. On weekends, mother and son would go out into the garden, pull weeds. We would prune the rose bushes and plant some small cacti that he wanted to try. "Mom, I remember when you taught me how to prune plants," he once said, holding the scissors with a faint smile. I looked at him, feeling a warmth in my chest. Although Valeria left a scar on his heart, I knew my son was still there. The same boy who had once smiled from ear to ear when he first rode his bike in this very garden. Valeria had left the city. No one knew where she went, and her social media accounts had been completely erased, as if she wanted to eliminate all traces of her existence. Sometimes I would hear the neighbors mention her, but only as vague comments, without details. I didn't care. For me, Valeria had become an expensive lesson in trust and betrayal in the past. I only wished that Diego could find happiness again. I returned to my quiet life. Every morning I would go out to the garden to water the flowers, taking care of the roses that Tomas loved so much. In the afternoons I would sit on the porch reading with the sunlight glinting off the pages. Sometimes Lucia would bring a tray of freshly baked cookies and the two of us would drink tea while gazing at the blooming garden. "You did very well, Mercedes," Lucia said with a look full of pride. "You protected your family." I smiled and took a sip of tea. "Thank you, Lucia. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have known what to do." One afternoon, as the sun was setting, Diego sat down next to me on the garden bench. He looked at me with a sparkle in his eyes. "Mom, I want to stay here with you," he said. "I want us to rebuild everything together like before." I nodded and tears rolled silently down my cheeks. They weren't tears of pain, but of relief, of hope. This house, this garden, had witnessed my happy days with Tomas, and now they would be the place where Diego and I would start over. I looked at the roses that continued to bloom despite the storm. I squeezed Diego's hand, felt his strength, and knew that no matter how many more storms came, we would face them together. After everything we had experienced, I understood something profound. Kindness cannot be given to the wrong person and trust cannot be placed in the wrong hands. There are smiles that seem sincere, but they hide ambition and lies. If I hadn't been alert, everything Tomas left behind would have ended up in the hands of someone who didn't deserve it. The lesson I want to share is this: love, but don't blind. Trust, but observe and listen with your heart. Compassion is valuable, but sometimes to protect what is most sacred, we must learn to be strong and calm at the right time. Because true justice is not alone in punishing the traitor, but in preserving the dignity and peace of those who truly deserve it. The story you just heard has changed names and places to protect the identities of those involved. We do not tell it to judge, but with the hope that someone will listen and stop to reflect. How many mothers are suffering in silence within their own homes? I truly wonder. If you were in my place, what would you do? Would you choose to remain silent to maintain peace, or would you dare to face everything to recover your voice? I want to know your opinion because each story can become a candle that lights the path for others. God always blesses, and I am sure that courage will lead us to better days. For now, on the final screen I will leave two of the most beloved stories of the channel. I am sure they will surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until this moment.